Hi, this is Christian Buckley, and this is the third webinar in the Governance Rules series being put on for the European SharePoint community. My name is Christian Buckley, and this session is called Risk Management in SharePoint Governance. All right. So what we're going to discuss today, some of the questions that we'll ask. So what is the role of risk management in my SharePoint governance strategy? How can I better understand my customer requirements? What's that right balance around auditing, reviewing, and sharing risk management data? And then how can you make risk management awareness part of your organizational culture? So some big questions there. It's interesting in this series, you know, why am I adding this into this series where this is a very project management centric topic, and yet it is so critical, it's so crucial to a successful governance strategy, because part of governance is aligning your technology strategy with your business objectives. And if you don't have a clear picture of the risks around choices that are being made, or as you're experiencing SharePoint in real time, as things pop up, if you're not able to go in and have a process, a method for analyzing the potential impacts and making decisions, you're not going to make good decisions about how to manage that going forward. And there will be impacts to those bad decisions as you roll out SharePoint and as it grows. And usually you won't feel the pain in the short term, but you'll certainly experience it in the long term. So, hopefully you'll find this of value. Again, it's a very project management, business analyst centric topic, but hopefully you'll get some value out of it. A little bit about me. So I'm the Director of Product Evangelism at Exceller. I'm a SharePoint MVP. I have been with Exceller for almost 3 years now. Prior to that, I was with Microsoft, part of the team that was chartered with creating a hosted version of SharePoint. I did my first SharePoint deployment as a consultant back in 2005. So I've been in the space for a few years. Prior to that, I was with a couple other startups, sold a company, was building collaboration technology back in the late 90s. But the majority of my career, almost 22 years now, has been in project management, technical project management, product management, and business analyst roles. I'm also the co-author of a book called Creating and Implementing Real-World Projects, which you can get through Microsoft Press, which is a great end-user / power user book that walks you through end-to-end how to create 10 different solutions inside SharePoint. So you start a chapter, walks you through, gives you the business justification, the wireframes, and at the end of the chapter you've got a finished product. And Exceller, we've been around in the SharePoint space since 2007, but the company was founded in the early 90s. We are experts in administration and governance and also migration. All right, so some definitions, and if you've seen some of the other sessions, I've got a couple repeated slides here that are themes that run throughout this series. But it's good to go and define this, because people are confused by talking about governance. Like, what does it mean? It's this catch-all phrase that means everything and at the same time nothing. People get very confused by it. So governance, to me, it's about taking action, helping your organization to organize, optimize, and manage your systems and resources. So how that may take form in your organization may look very different from other organizations. So best practices is one of those things. It's this platitude that people throw out there. What is the best practice around governance? Well, what is best practice for me might be very different than what it is for you and for your organizational culture. So governance strategy is it's never static, and that's something you need to understand. Some people approach it as this checklist. I've done governance. I've went through the 25 items on this list and checked it all off, and we're good to go. and it's stored away, it's a document, it's online, or it's in a binder somewhere. No, it's never static. It's a living, breathing process. And I love this. In my master's degree at my business school, one of my classmates shared something that his father had made about governance being a set of rules that you should live by, but not to die by. So they're guiding principles, but when they stop being useful, when they stop working for your organization, it's time to change them. It needs to be adaptable. You need to keep growing and changing based on the needs of your business. That's something I think a lot of people forget. So why are we talking about governance? So SharePoint out of the box, it's very powerful. You can do a lot with it. But a lot of organizations, I would even argue most organizations, don't think that they have the time, the money, or the people to waste on planning, proper planning. And then they find themselves a year or two down the road with this out-of-control system where they don't have the governance principles, they don't have company-wide processes in place, or even things like information architecture and taxonomy. The result of this is that it's a wild west. You have site sprawl. You have unfettered content, so content all over the place with no ruling guidelines over how people upload, how they manage that content. You have process lawlessness, and then you have a lot of risks that are built into your system with every decision that you make. Because there's no consistency, no matter what decisions you make about your platform, you're going to have problems. You're going to experience pain. So why are we talking about risk here? It's central to your governance implementation. You need to understand, both identify, understand, and then manage the risks involved with the decisions that you make about SharePoint. So it could be the process of identifying, assessing, and prioritizing risks your organization may lack, measuring, monitoring, and the risks themselves, and I kind of duplicated there, but measuring the impacts. So understanding, okay, we know what this risk is. How do we know, what the potential impact will be? And then regularly reviewing and modifying that governance strategy based on the changes, the risks that you're seeing. And then creating policies that secure and protect, but they're also flexible. So again, rules that allow you to adapt and to be flexible based on what changes you see happening in the business. Because that's how SharePoint is too. I mean, you probably understand this, that SharePoint is not this static, build it one time, walk away platform, but it's something that takes ongoing care and nurturing because your business is constantly changing. Your end users' needs and their expectations certainly are changing on an ongoing basis. You give your end users SharePoint, that vanilla out of the box without any customization, and they're going to be happy for a couple weeks, and then you'll have some of your hardest driving power users coming and requesting changes. They see the power and the capability of SharePoint, and they want more. Vanilla is no longer good. They've gotten a taste for chocolate. They want something with a little pizzazz, chocolate-covered almonds maybe. All right. So as you think about a governance strategy, again, don't take a look at this and say, okay, here is this governance methodology that Christian is prescribing. I'm just using this as an example. There are a number of different things, and there are, in fact, different workshops that I've participated in. I'm going to be doing a workshop with my good friend Paul Colmsey at the SharePoint conference in Copenhagen, and we're going to be doing an all-day workshop talking about aligning governance with the governance strategy with your business needs. And part of one of those activities is walking through and helping participants to identify kind of where their pains are, where their needs are. And they may identify from this list things like culture, communication, their change management process. But they may, and roles and responsibilities is going to be on every governance strategy. But they may be good at business alignment. They may have a strong information architecture already built into their culture, and so they don't need to, maybe they don't have as detailed within their governance strategy, but around those pieces, as much detail around that. Now, I would argue that every governance strategy would touch on all of the pieces here, and there's probably things that are missing from this. But again, it gives you an idea of some of the things to consider as you're sitting down and starting to plan out your governance strategy. So why are we talking about risk? So risk can be driven by uncertainty to requirements or business outcomes. So as changes happen, it just naturally risk is inserted into your project. It can come at any stage of the project. No matter how well you're doing your planning, something can happen. Servers can fail. A new business unit is suddenly put in place, which changes your information architecture. Or what commonly happens with information architecture, just to lean on that example, is that end users come in and say, you know what, all that planning, we completely forgot this. Or we just won a contract for this new customer, we need to make some adjustments into that. And then project management methodologies are a form of risk management. If you think of the Project Management Institute, PMI, and their PMP certification, it's all about project management, risk identification, assessment, and prioritization, managing the risk, managing the exceptions to the rule. So an example of some risk that might happen, say that your organization, they come to you as the owner of SharePoint. They want to build out a project management solution that aggregates tasks across existing environments. This is just a generic example that I have, and if you've been playing with SharePoint 2013, you know that there's some of these tools that are inside of the version. Of course, there's Project Server, there's other third-party tools around this. All of those are options. So what are the risks? What are the things that you need to think about? So you can buy a third-party solution. There are inherent risks with that. What's the upgrade path for that solution? How trusted is that vendor? How compatible is it with SharePoint? What's the licensing scheme and cost for that long term? What does support look like? How much training is going to need to be involved? You can go and build it from scratch. Is it going to have all the functionality that you need? Is it going to, this is true with any solution, but is it going to impact the usability of the system? Is it going to, does it need to be supported? Do you need SLAs? Who's going to run it? Thinking about deploying Project Server, very rich and complex product by Microsoft. But again, how much training? How are you going to be able to simplify this for your base end users? Who are the people that are going to be using it and managing that? You can also wait to upgrade to 2013. So what does delaying this launch until you upgrade mean? What's the time frame for upgrade? What are we going to lose in the meantime? What services, what platforms could we put in place elsewhere outside of SharePoint to help us manage this until we move over to 2013? So all things that you need to look at so that you can make the best business decision and manage that as part of your governance process for SharePoint. So another example, a pending reorganization. It's going to cause impacts to your information architecture and updates to your taxonomy. So what does it mean to go in and suddenly a new business unit is created, splitting two existing business units? So both those existing business units are impacted, and then you have a new business unit. So you have people, you have content, you have your information architecture and taxonomy, all this content that's out there, and then the processes and workflows and forms and everything else around that. Do you know what those impacts are going to be to your system? Do you have a method, a process for going in and evaluating all of those impacts? So clarifying changes in roles and permissions. This is huge. Because depending on the complexity of the environment that you have today, this is just it's a major activity. Understanding impacted content, the sites, teams, your users, and then moving or migrating content, updating the metadata, modifying those workflows and forms, and everything else that's impacted from this. All things which you need to identify so that you can make the best decisions about how to move forward. So some risk management strategies that I'm going to go through here. So some strategies to manage risk. So transfer, avoid, reduce, or accept. So transfer, is this something that the team even needs to address? Who owns the risk? Are you able to move it out to another organization? Or is it something that you can push off to later? Who really needs to own it? Avoid. So can you change the strategy so it's no longer an issue? So in the case of the project management tools, like again, is there something that you can do in the interim? If the decision's made to wait until you upgrade to 2013 next year, can we do it through tasks and sharing of spreadsheets and through a common dashboard? Is it something that you can just avoid the pain of making that decision, or is the business need driving you to take action today? Reduce. So can you minimize the effects of the issue or reduce the probability? So is it something that you could say, okay, this is going to happen, but in the project management tool, we can implement this third-party tool, but reduce the functionality. So it's minimal training. It gives the bare bones basics for us to meet our objective of providing this functionality, providing this cross-site aggregation of maybe a portfolio view of your projects, but without experiencing all of the pains of the full functionality. Or do you just accept? Is it something that you say, okay, this is necessary, we need to roll this out, we're going to deploy Project Server because it's essential to the success of the business. Here are the risks, here's what we know, here are the costs involved, the resource requirements, and let's just deal with the consequences and build it into our plan. And sometimes that's just what you need to do to move things forward. So as far as managing risk using SharePoint, again, defining the roles and responsibilities is critical. I generically put these different tasks in the project management resource, but these responsibilities could be spread out across your team. So things that project managers traditionally handle. So the issues that arise as they come up, the risks or future threats, identifying those. Documenting both the existing system, the future system, the risks involved, and the contingency plans for getting there, so that as the system, as the team reacts to the changes that are happening, what that strategy is, how do we move things forward. Process definition. So by owning the processes to move your project methodology forward, the process for approval of certain decisions, by owning that process definition, knowing that, well, the changes that we're making because of this reorg, this is how these processes, here are the processes that are impacted, here's what needs to change. Managing the change management process itself, and then communication is tied closely to that. So being responsible for communicating out, here are the potential risks and impacts, here's the strategy for us to move forward, and then as you're in real time, you're experiencing the changes, as the system changes or as other factors change, that the process is running smoothly, that people are aware of what's happening, and that plan of record of how do we move forward. So use SharePoint to do some of the basics. And I know this is just kind of a generic thing, but sometimes people forget that depending on how you're using SharePoint to manage some of the risk management, you track the risks and issues. Certainly my development teams do a fantastic job of using SharePoint for issue management, for feature requests for our products. And so we're constantly tracking these risks based on the priority and the issues as they come up so that we can surface those, make them visible to everybody, and then manage those. And as issues are either reduced in priority or closed out, they're moved within those lists. So it's a very simple model, but very powerful in both how it enables us to raise visibility, but also know what actions need to be taken based on the priority of those things. Setting up daily or weekly alerts around those content or lists, that's another key aspect of the way that we manage these risks with our product development, is that we're constantly assigning those alerts. Anyone can turn on alerts and notify anyone else, so assign tasks to individuals. And then we also use document versioning and check-in, check-out, so that we know what is the latest, greatest version of our plans, of our process, of our workarounds for problems that we identify, so that it's clear to everybody what that system of record is, and you have that change management record to go back and look at, where have we come from, how have things evolved and changed. So risk management is very proactive. The goal is to help you anticipate where a process or task may fail. So, for example, again, another just generic example here, but a vendor proposes 4 weeks of development. The developer who's actually assigned says, no, it's going to take twice that. It's going to take 8 weeks. Having that risk management plan identifies that gap, why there's that gap. And it could be that the vendor is saying, best case scenario, if all goes well. The developer is thinking, worst case scenario, here's all the potential problems that I can see. And the reality is that it will happen somewhere in the middle of that. Of course, I tend to go with the developer's call on those kinds of things because they're the ones that have to build that. And of course, testing always takes a lot longer and is usually forgotten by the vendor as well. But anyway, don't want to talk negatively about vendors, but project management 101 is also just to take any proposed schedule and multiply it by 2.5. But that's if you come from the project management space, you kind of you know that, and inherently you build in some padding into a plan, and it's based on just experience that things generally take longer than you plan for in the first place. Having a risk management view into your SharePoint implementation, it's going to help your organization to anticipate, manage, and respond to those changes. If you don't have it documented, if you don't have a process for surfacing these issues, then your organization is going to make decisions blindly about how to move forward with SharePoint. It'll enable your teams to work better together, and it'll also improve individual productivity, because it's going to give, whether it's team members, people that are working with SharePoint day-to-day, as well as executives who own the business aspect of the platform that may be paying for SharePoint, make better decisions about how to move forward. So you don't want to keep people in the dark about what's happening. So the top challenges in risk management, and this comes from, I'm going to refer to back here on a number of slides, but a great article by Thomas Barr and Michael Newman called 8 Ways SharePoint Helps in Enterprise Governance, Risk, and Compliance. Definitely take a look at that. It's in a couple places. It's out on their site as well as out on nothingbutSharePoint.com. But the top challenges in risk management are prioritizing risks, defining those objectives and the activities, measuring the potential risks. Really difficult to measure, like, well, what is the impact of that? How do you measure that to know whether you're trending towards the worst case or the best case? And then constantly being in reactive mode. And that's the worst thing to be, is out behind it and flailing behind and having to respond to issues rather than seeing them coming, with your eyes wide open and being able to plan accordingly. So some tips for implementing, and I apologize here, it should have some builds, but they're not showing up here. While best practices may differ between organizations, and again, as I said up front, there's no such thing as a best practice. However, everybody wants to hear best practices, so I'm happy to oblige and share some broader best practices. But organizations need to have that transparency of the enterprise and what's happening. So have clearly defined methodologies and processes to drive your risk management. Automate wherever possible using forms and workflow. So make it easy for people to identify potential risks, report those in, and for them to be prioritized. And a great example of this is that at a prior company, so late 90s, I managed a governance board for our software development processes, and where we had a process that any product or project management was able to go in and flag potential issues and risks, and all the way up through the channel, so whether it's like on the supply chain, within development, within project or program management, within implementation or delivery, so the folks that were out in the field, so they could identify like where within the business this was being impacted, be able to identify predecessors, the other related projects and potential risks with that. And we actually came up with an algorithm based on that, what we thought the impact was of time and resources, and put a dollar value on that. And we automated through process, and we didn't have a lot of tools yet, but we had this process, and then every 2 weeks, now certainly there was a process to escalate if something, immediate action needed to be taken, but the governance board met every other week and went through in each of these proposals, and based on the data and the dollars, were able to make more intelligent decisions about how to move forward. So we had process in place and a schedule with forms that made it very clear to everybody of what the process was to help a decision be made about how to move forward. And you can do a lot of that with how you build out your SharePoint environment. And certainly, my experience inside Microsoft was meeting on a weekly basis with the individuals, all of us who were the administrators and owned site collections and sites, and were responsible for the information architecture, taxonomy, and development activities on top of SharePoint, meeting on a regular basis and having an open dialogue about changes that needed to be made, that wanted to be made, and potential impacts. And we just there in real time prioritized those requests and then went back to our respective organizations and communicated, here's what's happening, here's where our requests are with the resources that we have, and here's how we're going to move forward. So the next bullet, so providing a comprehensive risk and compliance management framework. So we had that rudimentary change management and governance body there in my Microsoft organization, just like in this old telecom company I worked for, where we had the manual process in place, but we had the framework. It was communicated. People knew what that was. You can go and build that library of risk indicators and control activities. So again, if people know what the standards are, they know how to go and identify risks, submit those for review, they're going to use those. Then of course, you also then need to stay abreast of, be aware of emerging issues across the industry, across the technology platforms that you use that could impact your business and processes. With SharePoint, I mean, you have this massive partner ecosystem in place. No matter what version of SharePoint you're using, there are new solutions that are being built that could help solve some of the pains that you might be experiencing. So it's something you need to be aware of what's happening within your industry and within broadly within the SharePoint partner ecosystem to know what could help you with your compliance or governance issues. Look into industry trends and best practices. And then I highly recommend having a governance or compliance virtual team to regularly review and approve changes. And I found this, just wanted to use it as an example. It's not something that directly applies here, but having a specific risk matrix And there's one that I used back in business school and for business school in many years called the House of Quality. It's another great template for helping you with the decision-making process, because as you identify risks, and it may be risks that are impacting heavily trafficked areas within SharePoint, and your first instinct is that this is the highest priority. This one I see right here, it's my greatest pain. But as you go and weigh all of the various impacts and all the various issues, what's interesting is that sometimes what comes to the top, the highest priorities, is not the issues, the risks that you would first identify as being the largest impact. And then by going in and having an impartial process for weighing the impacts of the various risks is going to allow you to make better decisions of how to move forward. So coming up with some kind of matrix that allows you to weigh the important, the risk, the scope, the cost, the resource impact, all of those different things is going to help you with your decision-making process. Some other tips that came from Barr and Newman. So managing the risks, so manage them like your assets and procedures, tracking your incidents and potential related risks, displaying them in scorecards. Again, making that transparent to everyone. And I had some great experiences, multiple companies, of keeping kind of an agile, Scrum-like whiteboard tracking of daily updates to here are the various risks, here are the project managers and development resources working on each of these things, and here's the expected delivery of this solution. So that when you're in a situation where you have a lot of different organizations that are asking for their problems to be solved, but you have limited resources to go and work on those, make it very transparent in this scorecard model so that people can see that you're making progress, that they can see that you may only have the people to work on the top 3 issues today, but that their issue is number 4, number 5, and as soon as you have additional resources, you'll move them onto their project and move them up in priority. Define your own risk matrices, as I just identified, outlining the impact and occurrence. Manage those risk compliance documents, so that the process and the detail around the risks that you are identifying. And it may not need to be a document. It could be a list that has details outlined in across the column. So you can come up with the content type for risk management and make that visible and consistent in how you're managing risks, no matter where you have this content type being utilized by your project management individuals and teams. Track preventive and corrective actions. Be compliant with your risk management standards. And again, you may have compliance industry or standards, industry rules or standards that may provide guidelines for how you document, how you track and manage risks. So make sure that you're compliant so that you have the proper documentation for whatever standard that you may be managed by. Automate as much as you can. Workflow is a great way to do that. Forms, training certainly of your teams, the people who are going to be the primary risk identification, your project management, your analysts, anybody that's going to interact and participate in that governance body. And then schedule and automate reporting. So get as much data as you can about what's happening in the system so you can, again, make the best decisions about what's happening with your risk management and your governance model. So some of the benefits of doing detailed risk management with SharePoint, again, this is a lot. It's coming from that same article, but you'll reduce your overall project costs because you're not going to be making the wrong decisions. You're going to reduce any audit fees or fines or penalties if you have SOX compliance issues, HIPAA, or any other international standards that you're being held to. You're going to save on internal costs and gain efficiency by leveraging people, your resources, from duplicating efforts by not chasing issues where you identify, you know what, the risk here is too high, we're going to leave the system alone. And so you're not spinning your wheels going and chasing after every problem if the decision is made based on the risk to not make a decision to move forward or to get an outside resource involved. You're going to reduce the complexity of your system or your solutions by making smarter decisions. You're going to replace silos of risk and compliance activities, so you're not going to be doing this from a team-by-team basis, but it should be, across your SharePoint environment so that it's transparent across the platform, and you don't have those team or organizational business unit silos. You're going to reduce risk and compliance complexity by integrating those risk requirements. So again, if you're able to see this all in one place, you're going to say, well, hey, these two things, these are kind of the same. The action plan against these two risks should be the same action plan. So again, you're not duplicating effort there. You're going to then overall increase your business value. You're going to better align your strategy, your risk strategy, with your execution controls. So management can better see what's going on, so they're going to make better decisions. You're going to be more forward-looking rather than reactive. You'll start creating better time reporting around what's happening inside the system. And then, as I said throughout, you're going to be more compliant and have a better overall governance structure if you are proactive about the model. So planning for risks. And this is one of those generic slides that I say every time. Planning is key. Utilize your established project management methodology. Every IT organization has one. If you're not familiar with it, find out what it is, find out what standards are in place, what's been used in your organization, and utilize that. Make that part of your overall risk management and governance strategy. And then some of the high-level universal guidelines for planning, and this applies to risk management. Understand the business objectives. Again, at the end of the day, it's not about deploying SharePoint. It's about meeting your business objectives. So if you are, your goal should not be to avoid every possible risk. It's going to happen. Risks are going to happen. You need to manage those things because you're going to fine-tune your deployment to meet those business objectives, and then you'll find exceptions to the model. Understand your end-user expectations. Make sure that you're meeting them. The best way to do this with risk management is communication. Let them know what's happening. Let them know the potential impacts and what you're doing to manage those impacts. Understand your governance model, so how people can get plugged into it, what the roles and responsibilities are. For anybody that's invited in to participate in that governance body, make sure that they know what their role is, what's expected of them, the amount of time that's expected out of them. Let their managers know what's expected from them as they participate. Take feedback on the overall model. Iterate on the plan. Find what works. Streamline it. Again, you don't need to do something overly complex just because you read it in a project management manual. Find what is needed and necessary to move things forward for your organization, for your culture. Because the better fit that you can make your process fit the way that people work culturally, then the more accepting they'll be of that model. And then just make your efforts overall transparent. Let people know what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. And the more you involve people in their feedback, the more that they're going to accept that process. So risk management in your governance model, there's 4 key competencies. So the strategy. So understand the strategy of the model is to be proactive. It's about the coordination, giving visibility, having a dialogue run around here's the potential impacts that we see, here's what we need to do to take action. Then you have that the execution implementation portion of that. We're actually going to go and do something with the risks that we've identified. and then the measurements and monitoring of the actions that are taken. Have we avoided this risk, or have we successfully modeled this, or has the risk shifted direction and now we need to go back and plan and adjust our strategy for that. So again, some best practices, and again, apologize without my animations here. It's pretty dry, lots of bullet lists, but some best practices. Identify that governance champion. Again, these are kind of more universal best practices, but clarify the roles and responsibilities. Document your governance and change management processes. Clarify and document your information architecture. I always recommend having a detailed map, a visualization of where your templates are, your content types, how your taxonomy is structured, and then the ownership at each level within each site or site collection or farm, so that you know as you're consolidating, as you're changing, who is impacted to the changes and the risks that you're identifying. And then maintain a current list of risks, make it visible so everyone can see that scorecard, that dashboard, and then provide a list of current and future projects and business activities so you can correlate the risks that you're identifying with the projects that are underway. And that's also a key part of project management and portfolio management. So risk management is about visibility. If you need to audit your environment, you can't piece together reports delivered per site, so it can be very difficult to do that. You need to do that offline or purchase a third-party tool to provide that level of visibility, because unfortunately not everything is available out of the box with SharePoint. But without visibility, your admins will be completely reactionary, so you need to find problems before they become a problem. Where to go from here? Just in summary, risk management is at the core of your governance strategy's change management model. It is important that you identify these and have a plan for addressing them, and then make people accountable for the risk by making them visible, clarifying the impacts, identifying a clear path forward, and then vocalize the decisions to be made and the available options. So if people are aware of what you're asking of them, they're more likely to take those actions, and where the people are watching them, and they know what to do because it's been clearly outlined. I know this has been a lot. It's been a pretty heavy dose of project management, but it is key to your overall governance strategy to have risk management central to your change management plan. Again, here's a link to that great article, 8 Ways SharePoint Helps in Enterprise Governance, Risk, and Compliance. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can find me at cbuck@exceller.com, or on Twitter. You can follow me at Buckley Planet. My blog is at buckleyplanet.com. And I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to get your thoughts and your experiences and ideas on how this topic can be expanded. And we'll see you in Copenhagen in early next spring. Thanks a lot.